Hey guys, how's it going? So, in this video we're gonna be making a deep diving crankbait that's a bit more complicated and more technical than it really ought to be. But you know me, I like to do things a little bit more complicated than anyone else. That's how I get my kicks, I guess. But yeah, let's just jump right into it and I'll show you how to make this thing. For this project, I'm going to be using yellow buckeye as the wood, and yellow buckeye is fairly buoyant and easy to work with type of wood. But before I can start doing any shaping, I need to cut it into more manageable pieces, and I'm just going to do that with my circular saw. So what makes this crankbait complicated, you may ask? Well, this will have something called a hidden lip slot, which in order for me to make, I need to cut two pieces of wood that are identical and sandwich them together. So that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm cutting two pieces that are exactly 7 millimeters, and then I will later on sandwich them together, which will then hold the lip and also the wire harness that's going to be inside the bait. And here we have rare, never seen before footage of the missing link. I mean, those are some long ass skinny monkey arms right there. I think I need to start working out or something. Next I'm going to be drawing a bunch of silhouettes of the bait that I'm going to be making before I can start cutting them out. Next we're going to do some speed cutting with my jigsaw. After the cutting, I'm just going to use my new best friend, aka the disc sander. Here you can see that I have clamped two pieces together with, well, clamps obviously, and this is just to ensure that the two pieces will come out as identical as they possibly can and help me out later on when I start to glue in these pieces together. Now that I'm done shaping the silhouette of my bait, and I actually made several of these, I'm just gonna move on to shaping the hidden lip that I'm going to be putting onto this deep diving crankbait. And since I have several of these baits in the works, I figured it would be a good idea to make sure that they all come out identical as I possibly can make them. So I'm just going to make a template that I can then use to trace out the outlines. For the lips for my deep diving crankbait, I'm going to be using a 3mm thick Lexan polycarbonate sheet that I will now trace the shape onto, and I will then start cutting and shaping these lips. Before I can do any cutting though, I need to drill out holes for the line tie wire to pass through. Now that I'm done with the lips, I'm just going to use this template that I made where I can make sure that all of the angles are going to be exactly the same, and also the depth is going to be the same on all of these. So I'm just going to use this to mark out where I need to cut. Alright, let's start making the lip slot. Now, originally I thought that it would be a good idea to just use a saw here, but then later on I did discover that you could actually just make do with just using the Dremel tool, which I will actually use after this, and gouge out the hole even further. Now that I've made all of the lip slots, I'm just going to start bending the wire that's going to be going inside the bait. And first off, I'm just going to make a loop. That will be the line tie loop. Now that we have the loop done, I'm just going to thread the wire through the holes that I've made earlier, and we can continue bending the wire even further. I think it's worthy of noting here that the pliers that I'm using here are the kind that has a very narrow point and also has a hook on the end. You know, the kind that you use to open split rings and whatnot. I mean, most of you are fishermen and know exactly what I'm talking about. But it really helps a lot to have that extra room to actually bend the wire 90 degrees. I think the whole point of having a through wire in your bait is to maximize its durability. And I'm just going to try to go even further and actually make a kind of a hook that will go inside the bait, so that if there's going to be a substantial amount of pull to the lip itself, it's not going to come loose. Alright, next I'm going to be bending the belly hook hanger. And lastly, we're gonna make a back hook hanger, and I think this is actually the most complicated thing of all of the bending out here, at least for me. Usually, or not usually, but oftentimes I end up screwing this part up, but thankfully that wasn't the case this time around, so I think I must be making some progress. And just to make extra sure that the wire is not going to come loose from the bait, I'm just going to bend one more 90-degree angle, and we're done. What I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be tracing out the outlines of the wire where it travels inside the bait. And the reason for that is that I'm going to be making spacers that are going to be sandwiched between the two halves. Now that I've actually made the spacers already, I've placed them around the bait so that I know where everything goes, and I'm just going to mix some 5-minute epoxy and start gluing these pieces together. The spacer pieces that I made were a tad bit too thick for my liking, and I wanted to have a really nice snug fit with the wire sandwiched between the two halves. So I decided to wait until the glue is dry and use my belt sander to get rid of the excess material. It's finally time to assemble the bait, and what I'm going to be starting off by is I'm going to mix some 5-minute epoxy and basically smear glue everywhere and clamp it down afterwards. So now that the glue has dried, I can start shaping the bait. And unlike before, I kind of don't really have a plan here. Usually I would make a template and use that to mark where I need to get rid of material and whatnot. But this time around, I'm just gonna go by feel. Now I'm gonna start shaping the bait, and again I really don't have any kind of definitive plan here what I would make, but I did end up going with a V cross section, and that usually has worked pretty well with me in the past, so I just decided to go with that. And pretty much like always, after the rough shaping, I'm just going to even things out with some sanding paper. And if my memory serves me right here, and I'm pretty sure it does, I used grit 80 to sand everything down. And the next order of business is to seal the baits. And I've actually already coated these things once, as you're seeing right now. They already have one coat, so I'm just putting the second coat. And the epoxy that I'm using, I'm sure somebody's going to ask again, is True Coat epoxy. And yeah, after this I'm just going to actually weigh these baits. I didn't want to do that before because I wasn't really sure how much weight they would actually be able to handle. So I just decided to leave that for a little bit later. So that's next. For these baits I ended up adding 7 grams of lead inside of them. And that was kind of like the sweet spot that I found seemed to work pretty well. But I know that a lot of people like to drill the hole first and then pour the hot lead inside afterwards, but I always thought that that was kind of an inaccurate way of going about things. But you know, whatever works, I guess, but I always tend to be a little bit more accurate. I mean, it's easier to fix later on if for example you add too much weight and your bait ends up sinking and you want it to float. So, you know, it's just an easier way to fix later on if you actually do need to fix something. After drilling the holes, I need to use something to fill up the holes. So I'm just using Bondo from 3M. Before we can do any painting, I need to recoat these a couple of times again. And I'm just using the same exact stuff that I was using before, which is True Coat epoxy. Now that the epoxy has cured, it's time to start doing some painting again. But of course, before anything else, I need to choose some tunes to inspire myself. So I'm just gonna go with Immortals at the Heart of Winter, and we're gonna start with Soul of Fall, which is how I got my name in the first place on the tubes. And also that's my Instagram handle if you want to follow me, Soul of Fall Baits. And we're gonna start with black, which is kind of fitting since we're listening to black metal. Well, you're not, but I am. Anyways, yeah, I was asking on Facebook, Instagram, and also here in the YouTubes, what sort of paint jobs should I do for this project? And the most liked and most voted one was the shad, which is kind of annoying in a way because I already made a shad in the previous video, but we're gonna jazz it up a little bit and I'm gonna paint a sexy shad, which I haven't done before. Next up, we're gonna spray some chrome on the bait and make the scales. And what I have here is a netting that came from either bag of onions or tomatoes. I actually don't remember which, but it's a good idea to keep your eyes peeled when you're in the grocery store. Alright, let's start doing the head details. First up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade the background with black. This will help me accentuate and highlight those head details even more when I start using my stencils and spraying on that same chrome color that I used for the scales. I wanted to have a bleeding effect on this particular shad, so I'm just going to add a little bit of red on the gills. So before starting painting the head details, I decided to paint the belly, and I just chose white. I mean, this is going to be a baitfish pattern, so you can't really go wrong with white. Alright, let's start painting the head details, and I'm just going to start with the mouth first. And of course I'm just using the same exact chrome that I did with the scales. And this is probably the most complicated task of the whole painting process on this particular bait. But if you want to see, for example, the process on how to make the stencils that I'm using here, just go and check out my previous video on the matter, and it should be a little bit more illuminating on how to make these things, because I'm sure that there's going to be someone out there who's going to ask like how the heck you do that and all that stuff. So yeah, just go and check out the previous one. Now that I have all the head details painted on, I'm just going to start painting the back. And I decided to go with a very natural kind of light color, concrete in this case, to make it look a little bit more like a bait fish. Since I decided to paint this as a section shad pattern, I'm just gonna lay down a little bit of very bright yellow on the flank of this bait. A shad is not a shad if there's no spot on the flank, so that's exactly what I'm gonna be painting now with black. So I obviously wanted to add some bling to this bait, and what better way to do that than using color shift paint. And this paint is from Vallejo, and it's kind of like goes from purple to blue, and I thought that that would look really good in a bait fish pattern. Also, at this point I figured I wanted to make this bait look a little bit different compared to the previous one, and not have it as an exact carbon copy of that, because it was a shad as well. So I just decided to add this green color shift paint. Next we're going to do the fins, and I wanted to have this kind of like a see-through effect on these fins, so I'm not going to use any other color than black to make the fin rays. I know that a lot of people nowadays choose to buy their eyes from somebody else, but I always enjoy making them myself. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. And I decided to add this portion into the video as well, because it's been a while since I showed this, and I'm sure that there's a lot of new viewers out there that haven't seen my old craptastic videos on how to make those. So here it is. Now we're almost done and it's time to glue in the eyes, and I'm just gonna use 5-minute epoxy to attach the eyes to my baits. Alright, the only thing left to do is to coat these lures with epoxy. And I'm still using the same exact epoxy that I was using before, Coat. I think this is probably the best epoxy out there right now for fishing lures. I mean, you don't get as many bubbles in it as you will with other brands, and also it doesn't smell as bad as everything else that I've used before. I mean, there's a little bit of a smell to it, of course. I mean, it is epoxy, so you're gonna kind of expect that, but it's not something that will actually make you faint or anything like that. Alright guys, I'm gonna sign off with this traditional swim test clip. And like before, I made a batch of these baits that I want to put on eBay for auction. So if you want to support the channel and support what I'm doing, head out there and maybe place a bid. I'm gonna probably have the link to the listings in the comment section or in the description box. I haven't decided where I'm gonna put it yet, but it's gonna be in there somewhere. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like the video if you did, subscribe to the channel, blah blah blah, all that stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video.